right, so CAGED is a wonderful system that helps you just visualize the guitar and kind of put the whole fretboard together. The guitar is kind of a strange instrument that, you know, you got like 6 linear lines, 6 kind of pianos lined up. The beauty in it though is in its tune-in, which allows these geometric patterns, this CAGED system, to easily be able to transpose things. So if you learn the system, you realize, you know, this is a C chord, but if somebody, say you're playing with somebody that wants to play that song in F, you know, you can just use that C chord right here and immediately you're in F. You don't have to change any patterns. You don't have to, it doesn't even look different. Just from your fingers, it'll be the same pattern. So that's kind of that's how I use it. It's almost like a visual target and way to see things. So one thing I have a video out, but it was like 3 things you need to know to get from beginner to intermediate guitarist. And I would look at that video like, you need to know those things before getting into CAGED. Like, you got to know, you know, the notes on the fretboard. Like, if you don't know the notes in the, you know, on the fretboard, like that musical alphabet, like the CAGED isn't going to help you at all. Like, you have to know that first. And then like knowing your relative, minor and major, that again like doubles the CAGED system, because instead of just knowing those major CAGED chords, you can easily see where the minor ones are too. Yeah, so you got to know those 2 things. So look at that video if you don't know those. Otherwise, the CAGED is just going to be a waste of time, or you're going to have a lot of gaps. First thing you definitely need to know is, you know, you start with where the roots are. You know, so if this is all I'm going to show you CAGED in C. So you got to know that C is here, and you also need to know that C is here. So you have the C shape. So it's just that cowboy chord. And it's just the root, 3rd, 5th. And then this pattern, it becomes the root and 3rd again. And then for the next, so that's a C shape. For the A shape, which, you know, normally you play A here, that would be an A chord. To make it a C chord, you're going to take this C root, and essentially it would be the same thing as a capo. If I took this capo and put it here, and I played this A shape, you have a C, because that's the 3rd fret on the A string is a C note. So if I take the capo off and I bar it, you have C right there. And so that's going to be a little bit of a different flavor because of the way that the notes line up. Here you got root, 3rd, and 5th. Here is like your power chord, so you get the root, 5th, root. So it's a little bit, you know, chunkier, deeper chord with the 3rd right there. You know, I usually can't even play that 5th. Get the 5th down there. So that would be your A shape. And then again, so you got C, and then you got your A shape C. And again, it's just the cowboy, you're just thinking of the bar being the capo. And so the next capo would be on the G shape, right? You take a G shape, CAGED, C, A, G, and the G would be here. But since you're here up on the 8th fret, that's the C. So again, you got root, 3rd, 5th, what is that, root? And then if you play it like that, that's 3rd and 5th. A lot of people play G with the 5th there. So that's how you know where the C chord is up here. If you take that away, it's a weird one to bar. So usually people will bar just the top or just the bottom. So if I bar these 2 and then these 2, kind of gives you this higher power chord where it's just root and 5th. But anyways, the G shape is right there. It's mostly used with like a Jimi Hendrix, you know, Jimi Hendrix does that famous one for in C major. So it kind of gives you all that. And that's again just like one of the ways CAGED helps, is it lets you know where these patterns are so you can easily hit all the notes. So again, you got G, so you got C, A, which is really, this is going to be a C chord with an A shape, C chord with a G shape, and then after that is the E shape. And the E shape is this one. Put your capo in right here at the 8th fret. And this one, again, it sounds, all these are going to sound different because of the intervals. You got root 5th, root 3rd, 5th, root. If I take the capo away, there you got your E-shaped C chord. And then you put the capo on the 10th fret, and you're all the way back up here at a C with a D shape. So it's the D shape, but there's your root. So you got root, 5th, root, 3rd. And then if you put the capo all the way up here, this is the same thing as having it here. This is the nut. You're at the 12th fret. You're back to that C shape. And then if you keep going, you'd be at the A shape here. Then you'd be at the G shape there. And then you'd be pretty much maxed out on this guitar. So yeah, you should already know those shapes before, before you approach the CAGED system. And then the second thing to know is you got to know where the roots are. So if I know C's there, I know my next octave is going to be here, which is in the A shape, and then the next octave is here, 8th fret and the 5th fret, and that's my G shape. And then I know the next octave is up here in the E shape, and then I know there's another octave that's a 3rd on top. But the other octave is going to be here, 10th and 13th fret, and that's going to be my D shape. And then again, I'm back to another octave here. There's a C shape, A shape. So it's kind of like, it's just, so it's an easy way to visualize those. And within those, you have all the triads. So there's all the triads in that shape, and then you can do all the triads in this shape, all the triads in this shape. And again, so that's all built off of that CAGED system. So you can, starting with that CAGED and then putting the triads on top makes it all accessible. Then you can put your pentatonics on it. And that's like how you get your Jimi Hendrix, he's So that's all just CAGED and pentatonics. And then from on top of the pentatonics, you could have the whole major sound. And then from there, you would pretty much have it, have it all. So even if you just take that A-shaped C chord, you need to know where the octaves are. Then you want to know where the chord is. And then you can know the triads. And then if you know the triads, you know your arpeggios. And then if you go from the arpeggios, you can know the pentatonic. And then after the pentatonic, you can get into the full major scale. And then if you wanted to go into modes, you could just, you kind of, what I'll do for modes on this is a little more advanced. But say I wanted to play C Mixolydian, if I want to play C Mixolydian, I know that the parent key is going to be F sharp or F major. So I can just play, take a C, and I'm going to play the full F major scale. of course I'm still visualizing it as C. So that's how I think CAGED is kind of a necessary tool just for guitar. It just makes it so easy. The second thing it helps with is, it helps connect all those patterns. So once you get the lead, it's much easier to climb the neck, just knowing where those shapes are. So if you know those shapes and where they are, it makes it much easier to play lead. And then it also helps a lot for rhythm playing. So if you're in a band and you got like 3 people playing guitar and one guy's, chunking these cowboy chords, the other person's maybe doing a power chord up here. Maybe you want to like arpeggiate something up here in D. Or you could do it down here in this C pattern. And that way, once you really learn this and say it's C, G, D, and they're playing stuff up here, if you want to stay out of everybody's way, you go, C, G, D. And that way it gives you a completely different voice and knows where you are. And again, that'll help with the soloing when, if you're going to C, then you want to go to G. So again, that's kind of the intro into CAGED. I'll try to go more in depth on each of these shapes. So what I would, in the next lesson, what I'll try to show is like, you can just use one shape and play 3 different notes. So that'd be a good way to learn, is if you say you're going, maybe take 2 chords, then go to F. I'll go over that in future lessons. So again, just to demonstrate like what you can do with CAGED, how easy it makes is, as I mentioned, like if you're taking a loop pedal, you can just, if you're making your own song, it's easy to fill in the layers or like find the parts you want. So if we just do a simple loop, this is gonna be way too much because I'm gonna add a layer at every position. So you take the C shape at the C chord. And then maybe for the A shape C chord, so C chord with A shape, you chunk it. Maybe add a little bit more delay, and for the G shape, you do the top part and you just arpeggiate it. And maybe at the C shape you like do like a sus thing where you throw in that fourth. Then on the D shape, you add like a little repeating, like. So yeah, it's like way too much. But it's just like all these different layers you can do in different positions, and then if once you know the pentatonics. Here. Then if I go to the E shape, go to the D shape. it's just an example of like what the CAGED easily gives you access to. Like that was all just C major pentatonic, but it helps. So that way you're not like, I'm in this box, I'm in C and I got all these licks here, and then my other licks are up here, and you're just going from like lick to lick. You kind of can see the connective tissue between them. And as like everybody, you know, as you kind of figure out, like the different shapes make you play a little differently. You know, the stuff you can play here, stuff you can play there is a lot different than the stuff you'll play in that shape. So the other thing you can do is, like, if you're in a band and you're the only guitarist, it gives you some dynamic, like harmonic dynamics, like tone dynamics. So, you know, if this is just a, that's just like a, you know, just a C bass note throbbing. That's a terrible way to say it, throbbing. If that's just a C note, that's a C bass note, just chugging. Chugging's a better phrase. You know, and you're just kind of, you can bring up the dynamics by kind of playing harder. Or you can use pedals, you know. The other thing you can do is you can kind of use, I mean, that's like triad stuff, but it's like I'm seeing those C shapes. So it also gives you, for rhythm playing, I feel like it's very helpful, because not only does it let you play different parts in different areas, but if you're just stuck vamping, like you can do a lot with just that, you know, with just the CAGED system. So that's why I think it's worth doing the work to try to learn it. So a good way to practice these is you could just start with that C, you know, get a loop where it's, you know, you can, if you wanted, you could just get a drum beat. I always think it's great to play to a drum beat or a metronome or something where you have to listen to something else, because that's how ideally we play music, is you play it with other people. And so if you have a loop pedal, I always loved putting on just like, you know, ambient backing stuff, you know, you could, so a good way to practice this, I think, is if you have like a loop pedal or a click track or a drum loop. I think those always help, because ideally you're playing music with, you know, with other people and you're having to like listen to something else. You know, you don't want to be out of the main groove. I feel like that's worse than hitting the wrong notes. So even if you just had just the backing track, you can just kind of hit that opening chord, so you then move to the A shape, and then you can move the G shape, E shape, I'm off beat, hang on. So you just start with a C shape, we'll move to the A shape, that's what I would do, is you just kind of work through those shapes. You could, if you're really starting out, maybe you just go back and forth between two. As you saw before, like usually with that G shape, you're kind of playing half of it. You know, with that E shape, you can play it different ways. Same with this D shape. You can kind of play, you could add the third on top. So there's many different ways to play them. So that's one good way to kind of practice those shapes. So that's what I would do. If you wanted to add 2 chords to it, you know, that would be good, but you might need to map it out first. You know, if I was going to C to F, you know, like I know my C's right here, I know my F's there. Yeah. So that's how I'd practice it. You know, you can use those. Another thing to do is maybe you got a song that's, you know, the classic like G, D, C. So find out where that G is for the C shape, and then the D is going to be here, and your C is there. So you kind of remap songs you already know if you wanted to do that. Yeah, it's, you know, so it's find out what level works for you. So that's my CAGED primer lesson. So I think it's a lot of work to try to, you know, it's just something you got to memorize and do over and over again. It's not like a shortcut thing. But like a lot of things, when you kind of fully understand it and don't take shortcuts, you get a much greater depth of understanding that you can get to, and then you can kind of build everything else, you can kind of build on top of it. And I don't know how to play guitar without it. So the next lessons, like I said, I'll go over each shape, and I'll also try to come up with some exercises that aren't really like exercises, more just like playing with the learning the shapes through playing. That's what I used to do. I used to just put a loop on. I spent a ton of time working on that shape, and then eventually, once I got comfortable with that, I would just move to the next shape, and I would go between those two, and you eventually connect them all. And then once you have them all connected, then you add the next chord on top of it, and then, you know, then you can keep, and then after you get that point done, then you can start to work on different chords progressions. So it's a little daunting at first, but I feel like all the other methods that people try to teach, you know, I feel like the CAGED is a better foundation. Unless you're like trying to play, you know, if you're trying to play some like 3-note per string metal stuff, you know, CAGED might not be the best for you. But I think even with that, you would want, you know, you would want access to the best way to see, you know, visualize a guitar. And like I already said, like like people learning triads is like, that's all underneath the, like that's all on top of the CAGED already. And then yeah, like developing your ear is always important. You should always develop your ear. I think when I first started, I still have a terrible ear. But once you play it enough, you you start to realize that, oh, this pattern here, this note, that's what it, like, I know what the third sounds like. So once I'm playing, like, eventually I'm getting to a point where instead of reaching for like the note, like where it is on the fretboard, I'm reaching for the sound. Like, I know it's a third, but I also, like, more importantly, like, I know I want to play, I know it sounds like that in the context of a C. I know that, like, you'll eventually get there with your ear. So I feel like what, ear training is really important, should always be a focus. But I feel like what CAGED does is it gives you an easy visual and motor program for your fingers. So it puts your fingers and your eyes together. It's kind of a softball to toss your ear, because if you're just going by your ear, I mean, I'm sure a lot of players, some people might be able to get there on guitar just using their ear, but I'm sure even they get used to seeing certain patterns. I think, I love Tom Bukovac, and I watched one of, he was going over how, because he doesn't use CAGED, but in one of his lessons, he's like, here, I think there's 3 main patterns of guitar you should know. I forget what it was, but it was like part of the CAGED. But even him, like, he's gonna see he sees some patterns in there, but he's gonna use his ear to get what he wants out of it. So I feel like what CAGED does is it gives you a visual and kind of, motor control finger kind of system to put into, like, your ear and your, your soul of playing. It gives you kind of a pathway for that, Sometimes, when you learn to drive, you always kind of drive pretty easy straight roads, maybe starting a parking lot or safe roads. And then as you go, you don't think about it. You're not thinking like, I'm driving on the road 10 and 2, let me keep the wheels this way, let me keep my foot here. You just drive to where you want to go. But you had to learn kind of in the beginning, you had to learn like where the roads are, how to visually and steer everything. Same thing happens in sports. If you're learning baseball, you just got to hit it off the tee a little bit. You got to see the ball. You got to know what your swing is so you can put them all there. And then eventually, you just want to see the ball come and you want to react. Music's the same way. You need to like hit off the tee and practice in the parking lot with these, so that when the ball comes and you feel like you want to swing it here. But that's how it gets a little more natural. And I'm nowhere close to being any good at this. But I feel like that has helped me a lot. And I think it would help a lot of other people too. So work on those shapes.